University, and I will be moderating our discussion today. Unfortunately, the director of Central Asia program, Sebastian Peyrus, could not join us today. This seminar will examine the complex dynamics of managing shared water resources in the region, including the challenges of transboundary governance and the cooperation asymmetries that exist among riparian states. This seminar is part of a joint series organized by Central Asia Program and the Asian Economy Center of Civitas University on environmental and sustainable development challenges in Central Asia. Why we are discussing this topic. So water security and transboundary water management are among the most pressing issues shaping the region's long-term stability and development. Central Asia's reliance on shared river means that effective cooperation is not only an environmental necessity, but also a foundation for economic resilience and social well-being. Continued scholarly discussion and evidence-based dialogue, and therefore essential to support informed policymaking and sustainable solutions. Before we begin, let me introduce the experts joining us today. Dr. Iskander Abdullayev will deliver a presentation, Water in Central Asia, 30 Years of Transformations. Dr. Abdullayev is a senior researcher at the International Water Management Institute and a water professional with nearly 30 years of experience. His research interests include water sector development and transformation, the socio-technical dimensions of water management, water history, water conservation, and climate change. Dr. Jennifer Zering. Dr. Jennifer Zering's presentation focuses on transboundary water governance in Central Asia, old patterns and new dynamics. Dr. Zering is an associate professor of water governance and diplomacy at IHE Delft in the Netherlands. Dr. Zering has worked with several organizations supporting water cooperation, including the Council of the European Union and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Dr. Zering is also an editor of the Central Asian Journal of Water Research and a research fellow at the Center for Natural Resources and Sustainability of the Kazakh-German University in Kazakhstan. Dr. Rasima Salimbayeva with a presentation on environmental governance and water management between Kazakhstan and China. Dr. Salimbayeva is a professor and program manager for environment and sustainable development at the School of Arts and Social Sciences at Narcos University in Almaty. Dr. Timothy Randir will deliver a presentation on multi-scale water governance for sustainability in Central Asia. Dr. Randir is a full professor specializing in watershed management, water resources, water quality, eco-hydrology, ecological economics, and sustainability. He is also a faculty member in the Department of Environmental Conservation at the College of Natural Sciences of University of Massachusetts and serves as director of the Water Resources Research Center. Wilder Alejandro Sanchez with a presentation on the Caspian Sea at the Regional Ecological Summit 2026. Wilder Alejandro Sanchez is the president of Second Floor Strategies, a consulting firm based in Washington, D.C. Focuses on geopolitical, defense, and environmental issues in Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Western Hemisphere. He recently co-authored a report on water security in Central Asia, published by the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Today's seminar will consist of two parts. First, presentations of up to 15 minutes each, followed by a Q&A session. Please remember to submit your questions in the chat box and indicate the expert to whom the question is addressed. I will read the questions aloud during the discussion. Okay, so let's start. The floor is yours, Dr. Abdullayev.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening. You are in different parts of the world, so maybe time difference. I would like to start today talking story of water cooperation in Central Asia. And we know for this region, most of you aware this transformation started early after their immediate independence. And we could see how water shapes the politics and politics shapes water in this region. And of course, water can divide in this region or connect. It depends on how water governance will work. Therefore, I think Central Asia has quite parallel ongoing processes which sometimes very difficult to capture what is happening, what is shaping what, and what are the outcomes of 30 years of transformations. But I will try to really put things into order how I see it as a researcher. And of course, this region is one of the most water dependent, but also water scarce regions globally. And you know, this is the even climate change scenarios for this region are quite dire. However, this fresh water mostly used in agriculture, which contributes less than 15% of total regional GDP. The shared rivers, which is the two biggest rivers in the region, feeds and sustains 80 million people, but in future they should sustain more than 100 millions, maybe within 10 years. And also on top of it, the climate change and institutional fragmentation actually pushes water scarcity even harder. So this is, we can call it like a water paradox. In one hand, you have limited water. Most of it goes to agriculture, which contributes less than 15% GDP, but at the same time, the population is growing, scarcity is growing, climate change is an issue. And also, this region may be one of the environmental crisis regions, and most of us maybe heard even before water scarcity, we heard about RLC crisis due to irrigation expansion. The huge amount of water have been diverted annually, and we lost the RLC, one of the largest water bodies in the region. However, so far, the countries of the region were complaining about RLC, making it like an agenda for many international relations and PR, I would say, in attracting some investment to this region. But currently, I think this is starting to change, and countries are making some efforts to change fate of the RLC, try to reforestate it, innovate some other solutions which may bring more investment and look it into it economically. However, still, I think RLC keeps to be being a symbol of unsustainable development and environmental collapse in the region. And also, the region had been known, and most of the observers and researchers early were reporting that this area should become the water problem area, and you have to witness a lot of conflicts in the region. And you see this kind of very, very clear signs of linkage it, how water energy competition in the region may become a reason for the serious conflicts. However, I would say very interesting happening. Countries have tried to build the regional cooperation frameworks. Also, they are weak, but they became actually key dialogue platforms to discuss the difference between the countries. Especially for last 5 to 6 years, we also observe interesting momentum, where instead of competing for limited water resources or disputing on the differences between energy and irrigation needs, countries are coming to agreement to build together some of the infrastructure which formerly was seen as a conflict source. And we're also observing there are a lot of bilateral water commissions popping up, which are regularly meeting to address differences. And I think, and we witnessed that there is actually some kind of attempt to look solutions out of water, not focusing on water, but focusing more trade, economy, investments, and cooperative approach rather than only limiting to distribute short water resources. And we also would say there are some signs of regionalism and joint actions on transboundary issues. We also understand that institutionally, the process of transformation is not ended. It's not yet happy end, because we see a lot of institutional problems at the lower level, on farm level, where we see a lot of unfunded infrastructure, weak water users organizations, the former infrastructure which was built for bigger collective system not fitting into smallholder farming watering, because water institutions are still under transformation. They are still struggling between Soviet system and new institutions, how to tackle them. Because actually, all sectors have been reformed, the water sector has been least reformed. Therefore, new institutions, water institutions are still weak, and water governance scattered and sectoral. That's one of the biggest challenges this region is facing. And there is, on top of it, as we said, we are witnessing lately quite increased risk and uncertainties, which includes, of course, glacial retreating, droughts became very regular in the region. Even this year, we are receiving a lot of reports that the recent droughts in the region. Also, we observed the hydrological pattern of the bigger rivers are changing. They are losing their flow, and by 2050, with calculations of different models, we may face 10 to 15% of less water in Amudarya, for example. And still, even if having such a good agreement, still we see that Ragun and Kambarata, which is bigger reservoirs, issues are in place. And I think there must be like a joint solution on how to jointly operate these systems. And recently also, last years, we are witnessing that emerging Afghan government is also trying to build a new canal, which will most probably withdraw some part of the flow from Amudarya. The winter floods and summer shortage still an issue. So I think these risks coupled with new emerging trends towards cooperation make situation in the water sector in Central Asia very interesting. Because still water management is state controlled. There, of course, local participation is required in this context, but local participation is not present, or it is very weak, because grassroots organizations are very weak. There is no alternative platforms for water users' participation. But on the other hand, we also see that there is an actually increasing interest by public to understand what is going on in the water sector, because it's becoming part of their future. I think, therefore, I think the situation with water governance is like half reformed and half changing and half still Soviet style water system. Under this context, of course, regional cooperation and water diplomacy is important, which is happening. We know that there is actually regional architecture of the cooperation, which were built very early after the independence, when the Soviet system was almost collapsed. Countries introduced new agreements, like Interstate Council for Water Coordination. There was also attempts to build bilateral commissions, well-known Chu-Talas Commission between Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. And also, I think allocation rules still clearly described in the case of Central Asia, and countries know their water shares. Also, they are not happy with this. I think all this architecture keeps the system together. It doesn't let it collapse and trigger a lot of crisis or conflicts. That also, this example also illustrates how deeply presidents of 5 countries are engaged on water issues. And if you see their meetings and topics of their meetings in different years of the meetings starting 1995 until 2025, you see in some cases 100% agenda was full of the water and water-related topics. Of course, sometimes it was less, and sometimes it was only few sentences have been written in their statements. But in some years, even later, like 2023, 2024, you see almost 90% of agenda of the presidents have been full with water issues and water-related issues. That shows how much high political effort have been done throughout 30 years in order to keep this water engagement, peaceful and ongoing. In other hand, also we have these agreements and the language of agreements, how they change since 1992 until now. And you see, I just wanted to give a nature of this language, which starts from Foundational Legal Act for Post-Soviet Coordination, and recently, the language is changed to fair and rational water use, green agenda, regional water energy consortium, digital water management, climate innovation. So you see, transformation of language of engagement in cooperation also has been transformed from sharing water towards more non-water, out of water focus. And also, you may see that how much regional meetings have happened and what kind of cooperation context they put together, and trend in water-related dispute in the region. You see, for example, since 1995 in 1990, you see almost 3-4 meetings every year, and they were mainly concerned how to negotiate energy and water, look after the Aral Sea crisis. Later, it became disputed big reservoirs like Ragun and Kambarata debates. Later, it actually transformed for localized issues and the minor context. So I think from point of view, potential of conflicts related to water have been reduced year by year and since 1995. Currently, actually, the assessment by many researchers who works on the water issue, it's actually quite intensive platforms like C5 summits, IFAS reform discussions, green agenda, joint drought flood responses. All this reduces trend in water-related disputes. I think that's could be said firmly currently that dispute levels have been reduced. They are not wiped out totally, but they are really reduced. And this next map is also shows that actually transformations could be divided into 3 interrelated phases, like quantity-oriented water allocation focused until from 1992 until 2000s, more efficiency-oriented, security-focused 2010s, and benefit sharing, maybe slightly joint financing phase of starting 2020s. I think this is very simplified, of course, picture, but it shows how much transformations have been happening in this sector. Of course, there is a lot of efforts. Of course, there is official diplomatic efforts, semi-official diplomatic efforts, as well as a lot of other things which are part of this process. Not only governments talking to governments, but also expert science talking more, private sector engaging more because of open economic cooperation and increased trade in the region. Academic training centers recently started taking up, visiting each other, looking at each other. I think this all contributes more or less smoothing these differences. Of course, not again. I'm not so much optimistic that they are taking out all conflicts, but conflict level reduced by this multi-layer diplomacy efforts which is going on. Of course, a lot of support from international partners. Now, what you should keep in mind in the future for the future of Central Asia, there is a negative but also positive trend. One negative trend could be our use of groundwater because of more internalized focus, trying to reduce the pressure on 2 bigger rivers. Countries and users are overusing the groundwater. That's a trend which we have to see and observe. Of course, a lot of investment is coming into the region, which is good economically, but it could also lead to extension of irrigated area and irrigated cropping, which increases water use. Water may become a dividing resource because you have well-off and not well-off people, so poor people. Aging infrastructure, I think it will be one hook which Central Asian region will be long fighting against because it's huge amounts of money required to restore this irrigation infrastructure. Water use associations establishing water delivery services are still not coping with the demand which is increasing. Positive things, there is a lot of effort saving water. Recognition that water is limited is there. Grassroots water saving is also in place, so water users themselves are trying to do something. Investment, we see the investment coming into the water sector. We'll see how it works. Water governance reforms is ongoing, slowly putting efficiency up front. And we also see reduced blame game among countries on water issues rather than looking into more of joint benefits. So I would just not take a long time, just showing you now some reform efforts. That's just picture of the language which Central Asian countries using, translated to English, which kind of language they use. Like mostly you see water saving, water management, water economy up front of this talk, means that this is what actually shapes the water policy in Central
Dr.
Asia.
Abdullayev, just a quick reminder that we've reached the end of the allotted time.
Yes, therefore I'm also coming to the conclusions.
Sure.
My conclusions: hydropolitical interdependence is very strong. It's increasing in the region positively. Regional institutions matter, but they remain still underutilized and weak. Positive momentum, I think that's emerging. It's more towards coordination. Water diplomacy is going beyond water sector, so it's really applying a lot of other elements of cooperation. And water could be in Central Asia still in the future, either divider or connector, depends how these positive trends are better managed and water governance is handled. And the last thing which I would say, the future of Central Asia Central Asia water security is not about how much water Central Asians are having, but how wisely they govern it. Maybe I stop here and maybe pick up questions later to respond, to disclose more of other parts which I couldn't share with participants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdullayev. Our second presentation is Dr. Jennifer Zering on transboundary water governance in Central Asia, old patterns and new dynamics. Please.
Yes, thank you. So I'm just waiting that it's shared. Yeah, and I just need to switch it.
Yeah, we can see it. Yes.
Yeah, so but thank you very much for inviting me and for putting me after the presentation from Iskandar Abdullayev, because it's always a pleasure to speak after him. I can relate to many of the issues that he already mentioned and introduced, and focus a bit more on some of the aspects. When looking at transboundary water governance in Central Asia, I will now focus mainly on the Aral Sea Basin, and I know we have other presentations later today that also will focus at other basins. And I basically want to make, let's say a kind of a historical overview, what happened in the past 30 years. It will be a bit of a challenge to do this in 10 minutes, but I'll try my best. Looking at different phases, how governance developed. And I'm using these phases that together with Timo Dadabayev, we identified in papers where we looked at the idea of a regional water neighborhood and how this idea of a neighborhood and of solidarity always remained an issue in cooperation in Central Asia, even though when there were political tensions and conflict. And in all these 5 phases that what I want to show here is I want to focus on how different governance mechanisms have dominated how countries shape their relations around water. So the first phase, right after independence, was the one to institutionalize water cooperation. And I just want to remind us, and especially maybe the younger people joining who have not witnessed this, that this was really a period where many Western international experts forecasted conflicts in Central Asia, water conflicts, but in opposite to this, actually the countries very, very quickly agreed to some joint institutions. They came to joint agreements already in 1992, the Almaty Agreement, and then in 1993, the Kizil-Orda Agreement that established a few institutions that mainly agreed to continue the Soviet patterns of water allocation And as Iskandar already mentioned, not everyone was happy with this, but at this moment it was just a tool to cooperate somehow, to avoid conflicts and to further manage water jointly. And there was also in 98 the Sudaya agreement that focused particularly on the Sudaya River and tried to establish again mechanisms for water energy water trade, because the coordination of these two main water needs, irrigation and hydropower production, is one of the main issues that requires coordination in Central Asia. So that was the first phase where we saw like a formal institutionalization of regional water cooperation. And as already was mentioned by Iskandar, also there were quite a number of shortcomings, of inefficiencies in these institutions. And this led then to an increase in unilateral or bilateral policies, basically to replace this regional governance that was not functioning well. So, for example, because of the water energy trade did not function anymore, the upstream countries were just forced to use the hydropower the dams more for hydropower production in winter. So they changed the regimes of the dam operation, releasing water in winter instead of summer, when it was needed for irrigation downstream. So, and this increased unilateralism then led to a period that was marked by a lot of political tensions and crisis, and it culminated in the crisis around the Rogun Dam. It was also already mentioned by Iskandar. So the Tajikistan then resumed the construction of the tallest dam of the world, Rogun, at a tributary to the Amudaya River. That sparked a lot of concerns by downstream states and also protests, and led to very severe political tensions, also blockade of railway connections, gas delivery, and so on. There were similar tensions between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan on the Kambarata Dam, but not that severe. But that actually really had impacts on the whole region, on how countries actually could not work together anymore, because it was very much politicized and securitized, all water issues. Nevertheless, we also have to mention that in this period also IFAS, Iskandar already mentioned these regional bodies, so the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea. It was ineffective in addressing this crisis, but it still continued to serve as a platform for dialogue, also at a very more informal level and at a technical level. So this technical collaboration among water experts just continued, and it was based on these shared norms of, regional people often refer to brotherhood, of their joint identity as vodniki, as water experts. There was also a period of quite good donor coordination. There were efforts to reform IFAS, but it did not work out. But it was not like a total crisis and conflict. So even in this situation, still some cooperation and coordination could happen. And then certainly we see since 2016 a real change in the regional dynamics that had to do with the leadership change in Uzbekistan after Karimov, the president, passed away, and Mirziyoyev became president. So that opened up the way for Tajikistan and Uzbekistan really again getting into contact, visiting each other, and towards a revived regionalism. Iskandar has already mentioned also these informal consultative meetings of head of states that are taking place regularly since then. The seventh one has just taken place a few weeks ago in Uzbekistan. And in these consultative meetings that are not leading to any formal legal rules, but to a joint statements, declarations by the presidents, also water issues were taken up. And this is very important in the political setting of Central Asia, where a statement of the presidents basically has a very big authoritative power then for also officials. The way to also tackle water issues again, and also tackle these water energy linkages that before was very problematic. The same time also saw a lot of bilateral agreements on very contested water issues like on the Ottukoi Reservoir, on the Turkmen-Uzbek water agreement was reached, Uzbek-Kyrgyz agreement on the Kepirabat Reservoir. So many really small bilateral issues that were like pending for many, many years were kind of addressed and solved. Though there was also resistance from below. Also, Iskander already mentioned that there is not so much participative elements in these processes, and it also led to protests when the local populations were not consulted. And there was then again in this momentum another start for to reform IFAS, so this regional body where I forgot to mention this. Also, Kyrgyzstan at some point froze their participation because they were just let's say frustrated about the shortcomings of the institution. So that again was created. And then these revived regionalism and this revived also a bilateral cooperation then really also led to a renaissance of very concrete cooperation on infrastructure and on exactly these very, very controversial hydropower projects, Rogun, Kambarata, that also Iskander mentioned earlier, so that were very, very much opposed earlier by downstream countries. But now there is Uzbekistan actually opened up to, first not oppose them anymore, then even to buy energy that is produced by Rogun, and then even to establish a joint committee for joint funding and management. So a very new approach and really jointly cooperating on infrastructure. And even on the construction of the Kush-Tepe Canal by Afghanistan, that was also already mentioned, also here, Uzbekistan started the approach to not fundamentally reject it, but a very pragmatic approach to negotiate with delegations of Afghanistan to set up a joint committee and just to see, okay, how can we reduce the negative impacts this has on the downstream countries? That doesn't mean that everything is like nice and no problems anymore. I mean, we had very severe violent clashes between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan some years ago, where water access and water infrastructure also played a role. We have this IFAS reform that is still pending. So there are still many issues, but I think the dynamics have really, really changed to tackle them in a cooperative way. And that's why, I just want to say that we still have some old patterns, and also the old patterns are not always bad. I mean, many of them also prove to be working well in Central Asia, but we have some new dynamics, and we have both of them coming together and impacting each other. So we don't see like, a linear development from conflict to cooperation, or we do not see either conflict or cooperation, but they are both coexisting. So sometimes at political level, it's more difficult, but at technical level, coordination or cooperation is continuing. Sometimes it's the other way around. We always have formal and informal mechanisms that play a role. And we have regionalism and bilateralism that are also existing next to each other. Let me conclude by just summarizing the old patterns that we still have and the new dynamics that I also see. The old patterns is that these upstream, downstream asymmetries, they are still there. So we don't have a fundamental new fair and equitable transboundary water governance mechanism yet. There is still, some actors that very much stick to the earlier agreements. We also see, again, a focus on engineering solutions to very complex environmental problems. So that's what we see currently also with the big dam projects, where the discussion about environmental and social impacts is almost not heard. But we also see this importance of regional institutions and values for conflict resolution and cooperation that really builds on this, not only the decades of post-Soviet cooperation, but also the joint ties and cultural ties of the countries that once were part of the history, were a joint history. But the new dynamics is that, we have this regionalism, this regional identity being also supported at the highest level. We still have bilateral agreements, but in contrast to the 1990s, where these bilateral agreements rather, were, let's say, repairing regionalism or maybe contradicting it, it's now supporting it. So it's basically building up cooperation also from below. And we have a very pragmatic approach towards Afghanistan. And while the need to include Afghanistan in transboundary water cooperation is something that has been raised for a long, long time now, it seems really because Afghanistan is moving on that they're really taking concrete steps to it. So I think I've also reached the end of my time, so I will stop here, and I'm also looking then forward to the further discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zering. And we have a next presentation, Dr. Rasima Salimbayeva, on environmental governance and water management between Kazakhstan and China. Please.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me for this seminar, and I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm going to share our research in environment governance and water management between Kazakhstan and China. My name is Rasima Salimbayeva. I'm from Almaty, Kazakhstan, Narhos University. And we did research with Katarzyna Skit and Richuk around this topic, and I will share this is from perspective of Kazakhstan and which type of agreements were made with China and why it's important for us. So Kazakhstan, as we have not access to ocean, and from the Soviet Union Republic story, we have water scarcity in our republic, and we were all in the last place among these countries. And this topic is important for us. And our study was goal of our study was identify responsible approaches, solutions, and instruments for regulating water issues between Kazakhstan and China. And we followed 6 objectives, so explained and terminology related to responsibility. And we did literature review and around transboundary water issues between China and Kazakhstan. And we focused on Kazakhstan's national strategies for water management. And we described the collaborative efforts in water management between Kazakhstan and China. And we did it in 5 parts, which I will mention later. And we discussed particular aspects of the cooperation, the water energy nexus, and highlight this nexus importance for responsible, sustainable outcome in water management, and assess the results of the water management cooperation between Kazakhstan and China. So a little bit information about Kazakhstan. So as we have neighbors, so we are dependent on water resources, and around 44% we are taking from different countries. It's China, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Russia, and only 56.5% water formed in our territories. And whole our water surface resources in Kazakhstan is 105 cubic kilometers. So, and it means as we are depend of other countries, and we have water scarcity, and we should manage our water more careful. So, and around which type of water resources between China and Kazakhstan, we have more than 20 water bodies. So, and most biggest, largest rivers which we are sharing, it's Irtysh River and Ili River. And Irtysh River is one of the main largest river in Kazakhstan, and it's more polluted from other side. And Ili River is the largest river in the Almaty region, which supplies water to whole largest river large river in our country. And also is just discharging into the Lake Balkhash, one of the big lake in our country. So among these two rivers, we try to investigate what type of relations we had with China and how can we do in the future and so on. So, and literature review says, suggests that water-related matters between China and Kazakhstan primarily concerns distribution of transboundary rivers and environmental impacts, which can be categorized under the three interrelated themes. First is water scarcity and demand, second, water quality, and environmental flow protection. So I can open each of these, but I am afraid if I will take more time, please let me know. So water scarcity and demand, China has rapidly growing demands for water, especially in arid Norway's regions such as Xinjiang, and where the Ili and Irtysh River are critical sources of water for irrigation, drinking water, and for industrial use. And Kazakhstan is also dependent on the water from these rivers, as I mentioned, so particularly for farming activities in the country and steppes regions, and agriculture in Kazakhstan, especially in the southern part of the country, is reliant on sufficient water flow from these rivers. And water quality, as both countries, China and Kazakhstan, affected by industrial pollution, heavy metals in transboundary rivers, and in China, industrialization and agriculture leads to the contamination of rivers with chemicals, heavy metals also, and when these rivers, of course, cross to Kazakhstan, and this pollution can affect the quality of water in agriculture and drinking purposes in Kazakhstan. And environmental flow protection, third one, despite the existence of more number of agreements in transboundary water between Kazakhstan and China, there is no agreement in environmental flow. And at the same time, this issue is directly related to water allocation, since the environmental flow itself is only a relatively small part of the total flow. And Kazakhstan has formally proposed to divide the total flow of the Irtysh River, around 30% of the total volume of the natural river from the considered environmental flow. If I will follow next objectives, we also considered some management in Kazakhstan. So nowadays we are following basin principles. Our natural water resource management based in basin principles. So we have 8 basins in Kazakhstan, and most of them, almost all of them, are transboundary, and that's why it's so important. So we, from 2009, we accepted this national plan for integrated water resource management in Kazakhstan, and we are still following it. And in each our basin as basin councils, and we are working with environment water code, which established in 2003, and also according to this water code, we have these 8 basins which now are helps to manage our water resources. Also, we Kazakhstan water management initiatives have expanded beyond its immediate neighborhoods to global platforms, and we are participating with international organizations such as United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe and Central Asia Water and Energy Program. And additionally, we have green economy concept, which also considers water resource management and combining energy and water resource management together. So trying to follow green economy. In our research, we try to follow these 5 aspects. We try to see it from the political dimension, economic aspects, and technology, environmental, and legal. So the political dimension of water management between 2 countries includes bilateral agreements, regulatory measures, and cooperative frameworks designed to ensure equitable access to shared water resources. And both countries have adopted responsible instruments such as intergovernmental cooperation under the Kazakhstan-China Joint Commission on the use of protection of transboundary rivers. From the economic aspects, this bilateral cooperation reflects responsible approaches focused on collaborative infrastructure development and the joint utilization of shared resources to promote economic efficiency and sustainable water use. And environmental solutions, it's like positive outcomes, we can say. China and Kazakhstan developed reflects a set of approaches aimed at tackling water scarcity, pollution, and the effect of climate change. And also both countries join monitoring system and create monitoring system for making environment better. And technology plays a big role to improving water efficiency also, and also monitoring capabilities and ensuring the sustainable management of shared rivers basins between 2 countries. And key innovation has been the introduction of processing irrigation system and in agriculture regions, and also working with water scarcity and so on. And legal solutions serve as essential and responsible instruments and preventing conflicts, and also making some agreements. And the complex history of water relations between these 2 countries reflects an approach to balance shared interests and challenges influenced by political dynamics and environmental pressures. So, and also we, as previous speakers like Iskander Abdullayev mentioned, also chronological table in agreements. We also did this table. So we investigated some agreements and some documents from 19th until today. And yeah, it was like big analysis. And if you're interested, we can share this chapter of monograph. And I will not read all these agreements. So we did. We considered all this agreement, and to understand what was how this relationship comes from this past till today. And we also came for positive and negative outcomes. And positive outcomes can be technology transfers and increased focus on ecological protection. And negative outcomes is cooperation asymmetry and lack of transparency. And here in this slide, you can see some explanation of these outcomes. If I have time, I can explain. Please let me know.
There are 2 minutes left.
2 minutes. So positive outcomes is technology transfers, and yeah, I think I already mentioned. So, and let's come to conclusion. So the water relations between China and Kazakhstan represents a complex and evolving interplay of environmental, political, legal, and technological dynamics set against the broader context on the global south and south-south population. Kazakhstan has demonstrated a multi-phase strategy in court and national legislation, regional agreements, and international cooperation. And also legal documents, which I mentioned before. And bilateral cooperation with China has yielded progress in several key areas: infrastructure development, hydrological data sharing, and ecological restoration initiatives. And arrangement remains limited in scope and depth, particularly due to China's reluctance to engage in binding water allocation frameworks and the resulting asymmetry in legal obligations and negotiation capacity underscores ongoing tensions in what might otherwise appear in a cooperative dynamic. Thank you very much. And I'm very sorry, maybe I have pronunciation problem, and maybe if you have question, I will be happy to share my opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salimbayeva. We have a next presentation, Dr. Timothy Rander, multi-scale water governance for sustainability in Central Asia, please.
Rasima, if you can unshare.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yes.
Thank you. All right. My name is Timothy Randir. I'm a professor at University of Massachusetts. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share my research. I'll be talking about a very important aspect often watershed managers face is the multi-scale nature of governance. And I will be presenting in the context of the closest watershed, which I have worked in Mongolia. But I'll be deriving some of the lessons from a variety of watersheds throughout the world. So I just want to highlight one of the important aspect of multi-scale water governance is water is an resource which transcends many of the sustainable development goals, and that's really important to have a context of why that is a critical element worldwide. So here is a map of the water risk at a global scale. And most of the regions of the world, especially where there are stress zones are in higher red color, driven by land use changes and also climatic impacts, primarily changing the rainfall and evaporation patterns, but also it actually feeds back into higher demands for water. Central Asia is, I would call that as a perfect storm, where you have climate extremes and urbanization and urban aging infrastructure could be a perfect area to study and come up with some solutions on dealing with water resources. So I wrote in 2019, develop a multi-scale framework. I call it as a multi-scale ecosystem framework. Primarily, it's an idea coming from ecosystems where we try to actually from a local scale to all the way to a global scale, link many of the management aspects to becomes more sustainable so that we can actually have a nested type of a hierarchy of dealing with many of the resources, especially water. And the governance failure is primarily because of this ignoring these cross-scale interactions. So with that conceptual background, I will draw some lessons from one of the watersheds in Mongolia, which is a Tul River basin. Tul River is its center. It also drains into Lake Baikal, eventually downstream. It has in the headwaters Ulaanbaatar, which actually has a huge amount of growth stress, and also climate change reducing the river flows, that means affecting the water supplies. So given the complexities, the study actually focused on the eco-hydrological aspects, on trying to actually see what's happening to our waters. So huge amount of dynamics involved. So here is an integrated SWOT modeling used in that region, which actually looks at past historical climate patterns, but also land use, soils, rainfall intensities, and trying to look at a sub-basin scale with respect to changes in land use as well as climate variability. So SWOT has been a really complex model, has been used worldwide to study the supply side of things. And one of the results of this hydrological results of this supply is there's huge amount of variability in terms of what we have in terms of water endowment. Headwaters actually here generate 64% of the water yield in the Tool River Basin, while the downstream generates only 15%. That means there's so much of upstream, downstream inequality in terms of supplies. So the spatial disconnect between the supply and demand at each sub-basin scale, but also the disconnect, we could say, between upstream, downstream is one of the big problems in terms of achieving sustainable watershed management. So here is some more details about coming from that complex model in terms of seasonality of the hydrological components. So the graph on the right primarily gives some sort of a seasonal changes in terms of what are the stressful seasons and also how it's distributed in terms of hydrological components. At all the way at the bottom, we see the annual average discharges by subbasins. They're also highly variable. That means when we try to actually achieve a sub-basin scale sustainable water use, it often becomes that the demand overshoots what is available in many of the sub-basins. So this particular watershed has been going through a lot of urbanization, land use, the mining issues, a variety of use for livestock, and also in-stream water flows has been impacted heavily. So what we primarily did is we tried to actually compare the supply side and the demand as a development of what we called as a watershed demand supply ratio, and development of a metric where we could use for identifying hotspots. So for example, the Ulaanbaatar region has a huge impact on their local water supplies, and also faces a huge risk in terms of having a higher demand than water supplies. So in terms of getting those two dimensions on the supply side and the demand side, in terms of reaching sustainability, so here is some sort of options on how we could actually enhance. Finding new sources often becoming very difficult for many countries. Gray water reuse. Leak detection is really an important one for big cities where leak is a big problem in losing water supplies. Demand side management in terms of pricing, efficiency upgrades in terms of water use, and as well as behavioral changes. So what we found in many big cities is sustainable use of water requires a stronger demand side action, but also the supply side also is a really important one where governments can enhance and also avoid any type of wastage. So implications and bringing back some of the lessons from my studies worldwide. Again, it was mentioned in many of the previous speakers that water crosses boundaries. So there's definitely regional cooperation is absolutely essential. So we have seen worldwide is the upstream, downstream power struggle, and as well as sharing compacts are often need to be adaptive. So there's a adaptive governance, especially when we look at some of the climate uncertainty we are facing. And also another important one at a watershed output is the local stakeholders. Primarily when we look at within a subbasin in a local level, how stakeholders are so important to change behaviors in terms of water. So these are options I have mentioned earlier. Again, these are focused on the Central Asia dealing with some of the sustainability aspects. So in conclusion, I want to focus on three important elements. Primarily, we are seeing the water availability is decreasing. This is also becoming uncertain because of climate change. We are also seeing the demand is rising, either from industry or mining or even from residential demands or agricultural demands. There is definitely a need for integrated water resource management, but also incorporating a multi-scale governance. Primarily, when we add this dimension of a scale element to the water resource management, often it becomes really challenging, because now you're including transboundary type of dimensions, but also a variety of values and power positions. And then last, for a need for collaboration, especially on common goals, and also for developing these types of data, which is primarily high precision data, and also the dynamic data is so important to actually understand on how watersheds function, but also how the water sustainability is actually changing over time. And I will end my presentation there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we have our last presentation today. Wilder Alejandro Sanchez, please. Presentation on the Caspian Sea at the Regional Ecological Summit 2026.
Much. Katarzyna, can you confirm that you can see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So, greetings everyone. Thank you for the invitation to talk to you today. Water security and environmental protection are two issues that I'm very passionate about. So it is a great pleasure to discuss this topic. I know my time is short, so let's get right to the point. In April 2026, the Republic of Kazakhstan will host a major environmental summit, namely the Regional Ecological Summit, which will be held in the capital, Astana. The proposal was first made in 2023 during the Astana International Forum, when Kazakhstani President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev proposed to the global community to hold a regional climate summit in Kazakhstan in 2026, under the auspices of the United Nations and other international organizations, to facilitate dialogue and find adequate solutions to climate change. The summit is designed to bring together the countries of Central Asia to develop joint solutions to climate change in partnership with the United Nations. According to Astana, the summit is not just a high-level event. It is a 2-year process launched in 2024, culminating in the summit of 2026, where coordinated ecological initiatives and regional cooperation mechanisms will be presented, end quote. Preparations are already underway. On August 1st, in the city of Aktau, Kazakhstan, there was a meeting of Central Asian ministers of environmental agencies to prepare for the ecological summit. The meeting was attended by the heads of environmental agencies from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, the Deputy Minister of Natural Resources of the Kyrgyz Republic, the COP29 President and Special Representative of the President of Azerbaijan for Climate Affairs, as well as representatives of international organizations like the UN Resident Coordinator in Kazakhstan, the UNDP Resident Representative in Kazakhstan, and delegations from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. The session presented and discussed the updated concept of the 2026 Regional Ecological Summit, along with a draft joint declaration of the heads of state of Central Asia that will be signed during the summit. What will happen at the Ecological Summit? There will be many side meetings. For example, the Central Asia Climate Change Conference, organized by the Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia, will take place. Since 2018, the CACCC has been organized by CAREC to support the enhancement of regional dialogue on climate change and sustainable development in Central Asia. The summit is coordinated by the Central Asian Climate Fund's Project Office. As for the summit itself, the expected outcomes include joint climate action decisions, a regional finance mechanism, new transboundary projects, the launch of a regional program to support ecological research, the strengthening of interstate cooperation, and a common framework for implementing environmental solutions across the region. The summit will have 8 goals, and there's one that I want to discuss in particular: the sustainable management of natural resources, including the Aral and Caspian Seas. And you can see the other ones on the screen, by the way. The focus on the Caspian Sea is not surprising, as it is one of Kazakhstan's most important bodies of water. The Caspian is obviously a source of life for the natural habitat and the peoples of the 5 countries that border the Caspian, namely Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Iran, Russia, and Turkmenistan. Moreover, the Caspian Sea is a primary artery of the Trans-Caspian International Route, commonly known as the Middle Corridor, which links Kazakhstan and now China with the Caucasus, and from there to Turkey and other European and global markets. Hence, the importance of the Caspian Sea cannot be overestimated. Okay, a couple of facts are important to be clear. There are many legal frameworks that exist to protect this body of water. For example, we have the Framework Convention for the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Caspian Sea, which was signed in 2003 and which entered into force in August 2006 after all Caspian states ratified it. The Framework Convention is also known as the Tehran Convention. Article 4 of the Tehran Convention says that all contracting parties shall individually or jointly take all appropriate measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the Caspian Sea, individually or jointly take all appropriate measures to protect, preserve, and restore the environment of the Caspian Sea, use the resources of the Caspian Sea to not cause harm to the marine life of said body of water, and finally, cooperate with each other and competent international organizations for the achievement of the objectives of this convention. And this is Article 4, by the way. 15 years later, another landmark treaty was signed. In 2018, the 5 Caspian Sea states signed a convention on the legal status of the Caspian Sea. The goal of the convention is to put an end to the territorial dispute between the 5 Caspian Sea states. I'm not going to read the entire convention or review it, but I will draw your attention to Article 3, which explains that the parties will carry out their activities in the Caspian Sea in accordance with the following principles, namely using the Caspian Sea for peaceful purposes, applying agreed norms and rules related to the reproduction and regulation of the use of shared aquatic biological resources. There will also be a liability when it comes to polluting the Caspian Sea and damaging the ecological system. The parties also pledge to protect the environment of the Caspian Sea, conserve, restore, and have a rational use for its biological resources. And also the parties agreed to facilitate the scientific research in the areas of ecology, conservation of and use of biological resources of the Caspian Sea. There is even a new protocol in place to protect the Caspian. This was actually just signed or approved, I believe, last month in November. And you can see on the screen a press release by the United Nations Environmental Program about it. The protocol essentially is a legally binding document. So whenever new infrastructure projects are planned around the Caspian, they must meet environmental, transboundary environmental standards. Unfortunately, in spite of the previously mentioned documents and conventions, the situation in the Caspian is very alarming and dangerous. Recent satellite imagery shows us how this precious body of water is disappearing. To summarize, there are at least 2 major conventions signed by all 5 Caspian littoral states that pledge its protection. And as of 2025, there is a new environmental protocol in place. Unfortunately, the situation in the Caspian is deteriorating. This is shrinking, especially in the northern shores, which affect Kazakhstan and also Russia. The reasons for this situation are varied. First of all, the states that border the Caspian are diverting the flow of rivers that feed the Caspian, or they're building dams, which limits the amount of water that reaches the sea. The problem is that the little water that now reaches the sea, the Caspian Sea, cannot keep up with evaporation. Other problems include desalination, pollution, offshore oil projects, and greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change is another factor to consider. According to some reports I have read, if climate change mitigation efforts enable global temperatures to rise only 2 degrees Celsius, it is likely that the water levels of the Caspian Sea will drop by 4 to 10 meters. Even more, if global temperatures rise over 2 degrees Celsius, the sea could drop nearly 21 meters by the end of the century. The terrible consequences of the Caspian Sea shrinking are well known. The natural habitat environment and wildlife that depends on the water will suffer. The Caspian Sea is home to a variety of life. 6 sturgeon species live within the sea, alongside with the already endangered Caspian seal. The sea is also a hotspot for birds migrating between Europe, Asia, and Africa. The human populations that live within by the Caspian and beyond will also suffer. According to scientific research carried out by the University of Leeds, the exposed dry seabed is likely to release dust containing industrial contaminants and salt, posing serious threat to human life, as previously occurred with the drying of the Aral Sea. A drop in water level will also mean less rain and will also impact the area's agriculture. Moreover, a drop in water levels could seriously impact water trade routes vital to the economies of these countries, as water levels could prevent ships from docking. The situation will also affect the Middle Corridor, and the same goes for industrial plants and settlements. Unfortunately, I honestly do not believe that some Caspian Sea states understand or care about the severity of this problem. Iran is a good example. The Iranian government has a history of not caring about environmental protection and water security. The loss of Lake Urmia in northern Iran is a good example. The disappearance of this lake is hurting the communities of Azerbaijanis that depend on it. Unfortunately, the Iranian government has a history of treating Azerbaijanis as second-class citizens, so their suffering due to the loss of Lake Urmia is unsurprising. Moreover, while we speak here today at this webinar, Iran in general is experiencing a massive drought, to the point that the Iranian government is considering moving its capital, Tehran, to a new location. Bad water management is really hurting Iran, and I do not think Tehran will prioritize the protection of the Caspian Sea anytime soon. I want to say one more word about Turkmenistan, which is one of the most isolated countries in the world. A few months ago, the state-run news agency Turkmenistan Golden Age issued a report praising the beauty of the Caspian Sea, and you can see it on your screen. The report claimed, and I quote, Turkmenistan, while maintaining close ties with its main partners and reputable international organizations, is putting forward new approaches to solving existing and preventing potential environmental problems in the Caspian Sea, end quote. The report adds that, and I quote, by ratifying key UN environmental conventions, Turkmenistan, as a permanently neutral state, confirms its commitment to fulfilling its obligations, and end quote. While this government-written article uses all the correct terms and makes all the correct statements, given what we know about how the Turkmen government operates, I am highly skeptical that the country is actually engaging in the protection of the Caspian Sea, apart from signing protocols and agreements. Beautiful words are not translated into concrete actions. Now I'm going to quote Simon Goodman from the School of Biology at the University of Leeds. He says, and I quote, some Caspian sea level decline appears unavoidable, even with action to reduce global greenhouse emissions. And Goodman supervised a new research project about the Caspian Sea and the decline of the water levels. And you can see, and it was published by a journal called Communications, Earth and Environment a few months ago, and I'm putting a screenshot of it on your screen. I definitely recommend you to read it. It's very well written, very well researched. Goodman also said that, and I quote, however, with the anticipated effects unfolding only over a few decades, it should be possible to find ways to protect biodiversity while safeguarding human interests and well-being, end quote. This is a pessimistic, but also realistic analysis and prediction for the future of the Caspian Sea. And this is why the Regional Ecological Summit in Astana next year is very important. The Regional Ecological Summit is an ideal venue for discussing what can be done to protect and save the Caspian Sea. The situation is challenging, and the loss of the Aral Sea suggests that there is reason to be pessimistic. Kazakhstan is constantly raising the issue of the Caspian Sea. Most recently, President Tokayev discussed this topic with President Vladimir Putin of Russia when the two met in November, a month ago. But Astana cannot do this alone. Other Caspian Sea states must also be willing to embark in ambitious green and blue strategies to protect their own portion of the Caspian Sea. This is problematic because governments like Iran and Turkmenistan care little about environmental protection, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of many people. Further loss of the Aral Sea would be a terrible catastrophe for the wildlife that depends on the Caspian, for nearby coastal populations, and will also negatively impact transport routes like the Middle Corridor, which are critical sources of revenue.
Mr. Sanchez, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to move on to the Q&A session.
Okay, so I'll just finalize by saying that Kazakhstan has an ideal chance to cement its role as an international leader of environmental issues by having not only a successful summit, but also by leading a movement to protect and save the Caspian Sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the presentation. So let's move on to the Q&A session. I see that the discussion is already developing in the chat, so I will ask the questions that have not yet been answered there. So I have a first question for Dr. Zering, but also for other speakers. Do you see a risk of conflict between the countries sharing the waters of the Hari Rud Basin?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in the Hari Rud, with that, basically the river flows from Afghanistan to Iran and then Turkmenistan. There, we also have upstream developments by Afghanistan. I'm not an expert on this basin. I think it affects more Iran than Turkmenistan. So yeah, so there are issues to be addressed, but I'm not sure if there is like an, let's say, acute conflict potential. But maybe someone else from the panelists knows more about it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to the other question. We have a question for Dr. Salimbayeva. How do you interpret China's recent investments in re-educating and training water experts from Kazakhstan? What kinds of influence, technical, ideational, geopolitical, do you think such training programs can create over long term, especially if they become regular?
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, China is doing this activity for Kazakhstan, and today around more than 100 specialists educating in water system. So in Kazakhstan, we have lack of hydro specialists in general, and our university, not all universities are doing programs for water management for students. And in my opinion, there can be two sides of influence, positive and maybe this kind of negative. So first, of course, qualification of our specialists can increase, and also we can have some modern technology, modern infrastructure, and we can improve transboundary water management in general, so we can have a long-term better agreement between two countries. And also there can be good management practices. But from other side, there can be also like difference between conditions, like when climate condition in Kazakhstan can be not suitable from China view. And also we can be dependent of China's practice and technological things, and there will be some lack of agreement. So maybe it can affect our country. We can be more dependent. China. And yeah, in general, it can be good for strategic partnership. So, and if we will think in positive way, we can have more benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saimbaeva. Okay, we have another question. Hold on, is it the... Yes, okay. We have a question to all the experts. While surface water is critical for food security, groundwater remains indispensable for meeting the domestic needs of the population. During the webinar, much of the discussion, as usual, were focused primarily on surface water. However, even if investment priorities emphasize surface water systems, groundwater must still be monitored, mapped, and incorporated into planning, at least at a minimal level. So the question is, how can sustainable improvements in the water sector in Central Asia be achieved while neglecting transboundary groundwater management? More specifically, how can these measures enhance water availability from rivers alone without the use of groundwater data?
Yeah, I think I can already repeat in my presentation. I mentioned that groundwater is seriously affected by all the interventions last 30 years. There is areas where we have already problems with groundwater. Groundwater levels are declining. In some places, its quality is degraded. So it is a serious issue, and it must be considered as part of the overall water policies. Of course, countries included in their water policies elements of the better improved governance of the groundwater, but it's not easy. Still, as I said, fragmented institutions of Soviet type is overwhelming. They are, of course, been reformed and new institutions established, but it's not sufficient. I think more efforts must be done to better govern, better plan, and better include groundwater resources into water policies.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullayev. Okay, let's move on to another question. Question to Mr. Sanchez. Do you know why the summit of 2026 was renamed from Regional Climate Summit, as announced in 2024, to Environmental Summit? Did perhaps changes in the US internal and foreign policy, no use of words like climate change, influence this decision to change the name?
I saw the question. Thank you so much, Bota Sharipov, for asking it. Yeah, it's funny because when I was preparing for this event, I was talking to a friend from Central Asia, and I was remarking that if you put Regional Ecological Summit on Google, for example, you see results with all the three different names. I don't actually think that this was a change on purpose. I'm wondering if it was an issue just regarding translation from Kazakh, from Russian to English, and people are just using a different word. Because when you look at the research in English, they use both three different names. The articles that I see in English language sources are use all three names. When I studied it in Russian and in Kazakh, they tend to be primarily using the same one. So I don't really think it was an issue of I think it was a problem of translation more so than a policy from Astana of trying to change the name from one to another. I saw, for example, an announcement by the UNCCD, Interregional Group for Central Asia and Russia, and they mentioned used the name Regional Environmental Summit. And I don't think they did it on purpose. I think it's been unclear from Astana which name to use. It's, I think, only leading up to the summit, which will happen now in like 5 months. We know now to use the word ecological, but because Astana had not been consistent on which name to use, then from the United States and Europe, I think we're just using different names that seemed like they were the correct ones. So I think it was more of an issue of translation and lack of a one single name coming from Astana, rather than that Astana changed its policies because of what's going on in the United States. But that's definitely a good question.
Thank you. There's one more question for Dr. Zering. What emerging dynamics in transboundary water governance hold the most significant potential to rebalance long-standing asymmetries among Central Asian states, and what factors are critical for ensuring the sustainability of such shifts?
Okay, a huge question. So I think one factor that now really has to be addressed and is also addressed is the inclusion of Afghanistan in regional governance arrangements. I think the need was stressed for long, but if Afghanistan would really be formally a part of institutions like IFAS, like ICWC, then it will also change a bit the balance between upstream and downstream countries, because it's also an upstream country. And it might, then give also more voice to other upstream countries or to the concerns of upstream countries, even though, it also uses water for irrigation. So, but it really might change the dynamics, but including it is not easy. And maybe I just want to make a link also to the groundwater issue. And I'm really thank Aziz and also Shami who put these questions in the chat about it, because I think there is an awareness that, issues like groundwater should be considered, issues like the inclusion of Afghanistan should be considered. But there are so many challenges that countries already dealing with that it's sometimes just difficult, to, indeed follow action to this awareness, because, even just looking at surface water, even just looking at, the 5, let's say, traditional Central Asian countries is already challenging. So there is, I think, maybe also a certain hesitance to, then include other topics, include even more actors, because, there is a fear that it just would complicate things. While, I think all experts know that at the end we have to do it to really have a sustainable and long-term solution. So I think how to deal with Afghanistan, it's one of the most important dynamics on the governance side nowadays, and probably also the role of this foreign funding, so that we now really have, like, again, World Bank, Asian Investment Bank, European Investment Bank coming in and promising funding for this huge infrastructure that was, very long not the case. And I think that really also changes the dynamics in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We still have 3 minutes, and I see that there are no questions. Oh, yeah, there's. Thank you. Okay, there are no more questions from the participants. So I have one more question for Dr. Randir to close today's session. Given the multi-scale nature of water governance, which governance level, local, national, regional, currently represents the weakest link in Central Asia's sustainability efforts, and how might integrating these scales improve long-term water management?
That's a great question. Often the decision boundaries don't match. For example, watershed boundaries don't match your hydrogeological boundaries. So that is one of the mismatch in boundaries often create challenges. And often the biggest impact is at a local level. So there is a fundamental need for change in behavior and also acceptance of technology, or at least appreciation of downstream impacts, is something it's inbuilt into one's heart and values and perspectives. So any change has to come at a very local, but even at an individual level. And because that one actually triggers much more demand, which will raise to the other levels of governance through representation and other process. So I would say some of the big challenges is awareness and information related to boundaries, and also information about how actions of one is affecting downstream or elsewhere. And many times that is not apparent. So developing that information is so crucial, whether it's a transboundary or even within a locality, within towns and cities and even communities themselves. Understanding that local cooperation is so fundamental, which will probably evolve as a regional and geographic cooperation. So that's my comment on biggest challenges here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our experts for their presentations and to all participants for joining today's seminar. I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.